We're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, we would like to thank everyone who's joining us tonight for this seminar. We're very happy to have you here. If you are a UAB student, we do implore you to check out our Engage page, our MCHSA Engage page. And if it looks interesting to you, and if you enjoy the seminar, you should join us. We would definitely enjoy having you. Any of our UAB staff, if you have any students that you think might be interested in our program and our group, you should definitely tell them to check out an Engage page. We would definitely be happy to have new members. At the end of this seminar, we are going to have an evaluation link sent out. So if you guys wouldn't mind just quickly filling that out, that helps us come up with new topics, learn what you might like, what you'd like to see, and make new seminars available for all of us. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Shravani. She is an MCHS member, and she's actually the one who recommended this seminar. So if you think it's interesting, definitely give your props to her.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We're pleased to have you all here today at today's MCHSA seminar on the impacts of early nutrition on young children's brain and cognitive development. In 2010, the first 1000 Days campaign was created to highlight the importance of maternal and child nutrition from conception to the child's second birthday. This campaign was accompanied with mounting evidence noting the long-term impact nutrition has on a child's mental and physical development. Our speakers today are very knowledgeable on the topic of early childhood nutrition. So I'll start off by introducing our first two guest speakers. First, we have Dr. Kristi Guest, and she's an associate professor in the UAB Department of Psychology and the UAB Department of Pediatrics. She's currently the Disability Services Coordinator for the UAB's Early Head Start program and Research Coordinator for UAB Civitan Sparks Clinic. And also, we have Dr. Aida Miles, who's an associate professor in the UAB Department of Pediatrics and is currently the program director of the UAB's Leadership Education and Pediatric Nutrition Program. Thank you once again to Dr. Guest and Dr. Miles for joining today's seminar, and I'll be turning it over to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shravani. It was great to have you in my developmental psychology class, the honors class that we had previously, and it's a great topic. Had a lot of interest in terms of looking at early nutrition and the impacts on young children's brain and cognitive development. So we're happy to share our presentation with you today. So we're just going to look through. Shravani did a nice introduction to the first 1000 days. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at the influences on early growth and development, early brain development, and then jump into the highlight portion of the presentation on maternal nutrition, brain and cognitive development, specifically looking at a couple of macronutrients and a few micronutrients and influences there. And then end with brief discussions on breastfeeding and the importance of advocacy.
Yes, Shavana, you did an awesome job mentioning and introducing the first 1000 days. And as you said, it is the period in life from conception to roughly 2 years of age. And the reason why it's so important to focus on those first 1000 days is because you can make a significant difference, positive or negative, sadly, with the environment in which that child starts growing and developing. So the first 1000 days are regarded as a time of tremendous opportunity because we can make a very positive impact that will last the rest of this child's life. But it's also a very vulnerable time. If we do not provide that environment for the child's growth and development, and today we're focusing on brain growth, then we make this child vulnerable to diseases, to not having the cognitive abilities that the child could have had, etc. So it's a critical time. And I will add that some experts feel like the first 1000 days should be increase to really the first 3 years of life, not just 0 to 2, because there's a lot of development that still happens between the age of 2 and 3. But we will focus on those first 1,000 days and what the literature tells us about their effect on the child and future adult. And you may be wondering, is nutrition a problem worldwide? Malnutrition a problem worldwide? We are in the year 2023, and one would have thought that we would have eradicated malnutrition, and sadly, that's not the case. Worldwide, we have approximately 149 million children that have what we call chronic malnutrition that is classified as stunting. And stunting is a term that means short stature. And the level of malnutrition that these children had early in life was so severe that they did not and will not achieve their growth potential, their genetic growth potential. So they're stunted for the rest of their lives. They're going to be shorter. So that's chronic malnutrition. Additionally, we have about 49 million children that have acute malnutrition. So that is, the weight is affected. It has been less than 3 months, and they have pretty significant malnutrition, but it's still considered acute. So roughly 2 million children suffer from malnutrition worldwide. And when you look at the deaths of children under the age of 5, about 45% of all the childhood deaths under the age of 5 are actually due to malnutrition. So worldwide, we do have a very significant problem with malnutrition. And then we go into the United States. We are an industrialized country, a high-income country, and we would also think that we wouldn't have problems with nutrition in early life in the United States. But really, among high-income countries, we are not doing that great. About 1 in 10 babies is born prematurely. About 1 in 6 babies is never breastfed. 1 in 8 toddlers has excess weight, and about 1 in 7 households with children have food insecurity. So we still have a long way to go in improving nutrition and nutritional outcomes in the United States. Now, many factors influence the first 1,000 days. Many factors influence early prenatal and postnatal growth. We are going to focus today in nutrition, but that's not to say that toxic stress, for instance, and inflammation definitely affect the growth and development of that infant, that baby. Strong social support and secure attachment will improve the outcome of that baby. But today we will focus on nutrition and particularly how it affects brain development. The brain is it's not a homogeneous organ. The brain has several different regions, and Kristi is going to talk a lot more about the different aspects of the brain, different regions. And each of those regions actually starts developing and getting more complex and making, new cells, etc., at different times in gestation and also postnatally. So there's are times when a certain brain region is growing really rapidly, and then another brain region, starts growing really rapidly at a different time. And this is what makes things tricky, because the brain is going to be very vulnerable to early life nutrient deficiencies, depending on when those nutrient deficiencies happened and what region or area of the brain was developing quickly at that particular point in time.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I am going to just discuss a little bit on early brain development, just the basics related to brain development. So at a very basic level, the brain's divided into different lobes. You have the frontal lobe associated with reasoning and planning, parts of speech, movement, emotions, problem solving. You also have the parietal lobe associated with movement as well, orientation, recognition, perception of stimuli, the visual cortex, associated with visual processing, and then the auditory cortex, that temporal lobe there, uh, associated with perception, recognition of auditory stimuli, memory, and speech. And then the middle of the brain stem, the cerebellum. And what we know in terms of children's brain development is uh, it follows this proximal distal cephalocaudal trend. So from the kind of inner out is that proximal distal trend, and then top down that cephalocaudal trend. So what we see is kind of the brainstem, the midbrain, that functions pretty well at birth, responsible for parts like breathing and respiration and things of that nature. But the cortex, more responsible for human intelligence, that's something that develops over time and a little later in the process. So we have two basic cell types in the brain. So you have neurons and glial cells. So the neurons are responsible for storing and transmitting information, and the glial cells, a lot of responsibility for the myelinization process. I'll talk about that more in just a second on the next slide. The synapses are gaps between the neurons in the nervous system, and they don't touch, although they come close together. We have neurotransmitters that then cross those synapses, and there's a burst of synapse formation during that first year. But then after that time, we have a pruning of synapses. So pathways that are not used or are not connected, those become eliminated, and those pruning process takes place even into childhood and adolescence. So you can see the basic shape here of what the neuron looks like. So you have the cell body, you have the dendrites that come out from it, and then you have that axon. And like I shared, those glial cells, those are responsible a lot for the myelinization process. So that's that covering or that sheath of the axon that's really insulating or improving that connectivity of one neuron, getting the proper message to the next. And myelinization is occurring rapidly during those first 2 years of life. It does continue, though, later than that. And the myelinization process does follow that cephalocaudal proximal distal pattern and trend as well. So what we see is as toddlers are developing, we see a steep increase in that synaptic density. So those number of synapses and connections among the neurons, as well as new neurons being produced. Then we have that longer process of pruning for it to become the system to become more efficient. And this is just a nice little graph that shows what those synaptic connections look like over those first couple of years of life, with the greatest kind of density there you can see happening at 24 months of age. So just what we're going to focus on and concentrate then is how is kind of nutrition important in what's happening in terms of the brain. So that's where we're going to go next in terms of thinking about some of those specific macronutrients and micronutrients. What we know in general is that typical brain development is highly dependent on nutrient intake. If we don't have, pregnant women don't have adequate intake of nutrients, that can actually change the cell proliferation and the neural differentiation. So cell proliferation would be that earliest step in the process of developing the brain, and the number and the types of cells that are produced, and that can be modulated by a number of different genetic as well as environmental influences. So, in particular, what we're going to focus on today is just that environmental influence of nutrition and the importance of it. And one factor, just to display that, is poor maternal nutrition during pregnancy has been shown to be related to intrauterine growth restriction, which is associated with lower intelligence scores later during development. I also want to point out here that I will be using a lot of information that you'll see on the slides for reference point of view is from a meta-analysis that was done by Cortez and Albarons in 2021. So a pretty recent meta-analysis that really did a nice synthesis covering many studies that have been done in this area. I think around 80 to 85 studies that were included in that meta-analysis. So you're going to hear some of the results from that particular study. Maternal undernutrition may affect brain growth, specifically in the amygdala. The amygdala, you'll know, is important for processing novelty or even enhances memory. So, like for survival factor. So, if something was really fearful, that would be very prominent in terms of memory for that. The prefrontal cortex, responsible, of course, for our executive functioning, so planning, selecting, coordinating our thoughts, extremely important for intelligence. Hypothalamus governs the endocrine system or the hormone system, which controls maintenance and functioning, like things like eating. It's part of the limbic system. And then the autonomic nervous system, important for life support functions like heart rate, blood pressure, respiration. So as you can imagine, if these parts of the brain are impacted by undernutrition, then that's going to relate to cognitive impairments.
So we're going to talk first about macronutrients, and macronutrients are the big nutrients when we look at all the nutrients. So they're carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are the three macronutrients. We're going to focus in this presentation on polyunsaturated fatty acids and protein. And I do not want you to think that carbohydrates are not critical in the development of a child. Carbohydrates provide energy. But we're going to focus today on polyunsaturated fats and proteins, but we don't want to dismiss the importance of carbohydrates as well. And starting with polyunsaturated fatty acids, and polyunsaturated is a type of fatty acids. There's different types of fats, and you probably have heard about healthy fats and unhealthy fats. Polyunsaturated are healthy fats. Overall, unsaturated fats are healthy fats, typically liquid at room temperature. And we find polyunsaturated fats in many of the oils that we use for cooking. So corn, canola, sunflower oil. We also find polyunsaturated fats in nuts and seeds, tofu and soybeans. So, good source of fats, beneficial for many health outcomes, including brain development, as you will hear in a minute, and also oily fish. You probably associate oily fish with omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are also polyunsaturated fatty acids. So these types of fats are very critical in the development of that baby and critical in maternal nutrition. And Kristi will talk more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so their polyunsaturated fatty acids are very important for supporting development of the brain, the nervous system, even the retina has been implicated in terms of outcomes, supports for formation of neuronal membranes, synapse maturation, that myelinization process that we talked about. So conveying a neuron being able to convey the message properly to the next neuron. Fatty acids are basic components of neuron membranes, the dendrites, the synaptic connections, neuronal signal processing, and neurotransmitters. So this review study used this label of they're essential for brain development and functioning. Intake during pregnancy has been related to typical levels during pregnancy have been related to decreasing the risk of lower IQ. So acting as enhancement for that protective factor. Typical levels during pregnancy are associated with higher mental processing, higher verbal abilities, better visual acuity, again related to the retina. Mothers taking specific polyunsaturated fatty acid supplements during pregnancy has been shown to be associated with higher developmental scores and outcomes for children. The Avon longitudinal study of parents and children that was done in the UK with 7,421 British pregnant women and following their children through years of development did find higher intakes of seafood and fish was associated with higher language and social skills. So even after adjusting for a wide range of covariates. So it was found that longitudinally that's had impacts in terms of being associated with higher IQs for the supplemental group that was receiving additional sources of the polyunsaturated fatty acids. And then higher concentrations during pregnancy have also been associated with improved cognitive development at 11 months of age. These assessments were using the Bailey scales of infant development, so a really well done assessment of cognitive skills, and showed increases there, as well as improved memory performance during school. So when they looked even longer than 11 months, but looking at like 8 years of age, seeing those memory improvements as well. A meta-analysis that was done by Gold found a significant protective effect for those supplemental polyunsaturated fat supplemental group for women, specifically though women of lower education levels. So when they looked at the cognitive development outcomes of children, they found that it was impactful specifically for that lower education group of women. So women who had not completed a degree, did not have a completion of a trade school or a diploma of some type, they were found to benefit the most from the supplements.
So we just heard that polyunsaturated fatty acids are very beneficial to the development of that brain. Fats are good. Just a point that some of you may not know is that the requirement for fat, when we look at percentage of calories that come from carbohydrate, protein, and fat, in early childhood, that requirement is much higher than the requirement that we have for the rest of our lives. And part of it is because we are growing a brain very quickly in early childhood. But the other macronutrient that we're going to talk about is proteins. And proteins are primarily found in animal products, or we think of proteins primarily from animal products. So your meats, it could be beef, chicken, it could be pork, it could be a variety, it could be fish. So any of your animal sources will give you protein. Dairy products are also rich in protein. And then there are some plant-based proteins. Those would be things like nuts and seeds, legumes, tofu, soy. They're also good sources of protein. So very, very key also in the development of that young brain.
And research shows that intake of proteins during pregnancy has been related to higher intellectual ability. So, with a high protein diet during pregnancy, seeing improvements in information processing, numeracy, vocabulary levels. So, all of those important components that are playing a part there related to protein intake. Also, motor abilities, as well as just general cognitive abilities, but motor abilities even influenced by protein intake. So they've looked at, studies have looked at supplements. So, what about when you give supplements of protein to pregnant women or women who are breastfeeding, and you look at longitudinal outcomes for that? So, they find that children in those high calorie, high protein supplement groups, their children had higher knowledge, numeracy, reading, vocabulary, faster reaction times than those that were in the low supplement group, so in the control group. And then supplementation even seemed to be more important for at-risk groups. So this is not the only study that found this particular um, protective factor for more of those at-risk groups, like we saw with the low income before, having more of an influence for children receiving that high protein, high calorie supplements. They didn't actually see a difference between the low versus high SES groups within those when they were looking at assessment test scores like cognitive functioning, things of that nature. But when they looked in the supplement groups for those receiving the low protein, low calorie supplements, the children with the higher socioeconomic status performed better on those tests. So really that really being influential for that low socioeconomic status in this case, and in the previous case for the lower kind of maternal education levels, kind of another proxy for SES.
So we have talked about macronutrients, fats, and proteins. I will make a little comment about the protein, this study that was done in Guatemala. I'm actually from Guatemala. And a study like that will never be replicated because of IRB. It will be very difficult. When you start seeing that some children have a better outcome than others, and also to not provide proper nutrition to pregnant or lactating mothers would not be ethical in this day and age. But we have very good data, and other studies that have not been that extreme have also shown the deleterious effect of low protein, low calories as well on the brain. But we're going to shift to micronutrients, and these are vitamins and minerals, and some trace elements are called micronutrients. We're going to focus only on 4: iron, zinc, B12, and iodine, because the research has shown over the years that they are critical in brain development. And iron, I feel like many of us know about iron because we know that if we don't have enough iron in our diet, we will have anemia, and that makes us feel very weak, which is very true. So iron does carry oxygen in our hemoglobin, but it has many, many, many functions, and many studies have shown over time that an iron deficiency during pregnancy and also early postnatally has very deleterious effect on that child. But for you to know, where do mothers or where do pregnant women get iron? Most of your iron is going to come from animal sources, meats, particularly red meats, and that's called heme iron. That's just the name of the compound, the type of iron that's found in animal sources. And heme iron is easily absorbed by the body. And actually, during pregnancy, the pregnant women's intestine lets you absorb, more iron. It's amazing how, things happen for the best. You also have non-heme iron sources. Those would be plant-based iron sources. So, for instance, whole grains, some dark green vegetables, tofu. So there's iron in other foods. Even molasses has iron. Non-heme iron is not very well absorbed, unfortunately. So to enhance the absorption of non-heme iron, we need to make sure that the person is consuming a high vitamin C food with it. So this graphics shows fruits. Fruits actually don't have iron, but many fruits, particularly citrus fruits, have a high vitamin C content. So making sure that women or people that are pregnant are consuming a high vitamin C source with those sources of iron is important.
Yes, and we do know about iron deficiencies, so the prevalence of those. So that same review article that I mentioned earlier talked about estimates that in some low and middle income countries, the prevalence could be as high as like 40%. And for more developed countries like Australia and the US, rates of like 18 to 20% of having iron deficiencies. There have been, according to the research studies reviewed, some mixed results when they look at the impact of iron during development. A recent systematic review that was done by McMahon in 2020 looked at the impact of iron deficiency and iron supplementation and found that it was just not consistent. So what this really means, and what the authors said from this particular study was, we just need more high quality studies that have been done. So in order for us to specifically know outcomes, it's important for us to have high quality research that's done to be able to tell that. From previous studies, and that McGann article looked at 186 articles that were eligible, but they really only retained 26 for analyses because, again, they were wanting those real high quality studies to look at. And looked at outcomes using the Bailey, the Mullen scales of early learning, Wechsler preschool and primary scales, the WIPSI for IQ. So looked at some nice measurements in terms of that. We see from other studies that iron deficiency anemia has also been listed, though, as a risk factor for cognitive impairment. So we do know iron's important. We just need better studies to kind of prove and show that. Another study, the review article that I mentioned by Cortez and Alvarez, states that iron status in utero has been shown to be related to reduced language abilities, fine motor skills, decreases in intelligence, poor behavioral abilities, and poor recognition memory as well. So important. Still a very important factor to and a micronutrient to consider in terms of development and what's happening for outcomes for children.
The next nutrient we're going to talk about is zinc. And zinc is a mineral. It's another micronutrient that has that it takes part in a significant number of chemical reactions in the body, critical for growth and development. It is also mostly found in animal products and some legumes. Very little zinc in vegetables. Interestingly, oysters have the highest zinc content of any food that we can think of, but very few people consume oysters. So it is really critical that pregnant women have good sources of zinc. And some foods are fortified with zinc intentionally to make sure that individuals consume enough zinc. And for early childhood, infant cereal in the United States is fortified with both iron and zinc, which are the two nutrients that we have covered already because of how critical they are in the baby's early development.
So zinc deficiency is another common nutritional deficiency. Estimates are that about 30 to 40% of the global population are impacted by zinc deficiency. And zinc is important for brain development, as Aida just shared with you. It appears to really be a vital nutrient in terms of the brain, important for brain structure. So actual what the brain looks like and making sure that that the structure is there appropriately. Brain functioning through the role of DNA and RNA synthesis. Zinc is important. Zinc's important for metabolism of protein, carbohydrates, fats, as Aida just mentioned as well. And then for those neurons, creating neurons, so making new neurons, the neuron synapse formation taking place appropriately. Zinc is important for all of those important steps in terms of brain development. So deficiency of zinc during infancy has been associated with detrimental impacts. So if you're looking at measures like attention or short-term memory, it is important and plays a role in those processes and it is associated with that. Low maternal zinc intake. So they did a study with Egyptian mothers and found that low intake was associated with lower levels, again, of attention in newborns as measured with the Brazelton Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale. And so there are research findings for that. However, a scoping review study stated that evidence does not strongly support a zinc supplementation alone as to demonstrate improvements on cognitive development. So maybe not just that alone, but it might need to take place with these other macronutrients and micronutrients that we've talked about in terms of having an impact. And randomized controlled trials that they've done looking at zinc supplementation cross-culturally have not in and of itself shown those effects on cognitive abilities. Although we know it's important for brain development, as I shared with you previously, the randomized controlled trials have just not showed the supplementation having an impact just in and of itself of zinc.
And the next micronutrient that we will talk about is vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is only found in animal products. So there seems to be a trend here that most of these macronutrients are in higher concentrations or only in animal products. So fish, meat, poultry, dairy products, eggs. So it becomes an issue when we have vegan parents or vegetarian that do not consume dairy or eggs because it's only found in these products. So what these individuals need to do is take a B12 supplement or make sure that they're taking foods that are fortified with iron, with vitamin B12. We do have a good number of individuals in the United States, women that do not get enough vitamin B12. About 8% of women do not get enough vitamin B12. And in some lower income countries and middle income countries, the insufficiency of vitamin B12 is even higher. Vitamin B12 is critical for the health of your neurons, your brain, and your neurological system. But it also, B12 deficiency also causes anemia in the mother. So very critical that women are getting enough vitamin B12 during pregnancy.
And just like Aida just shared with you, recommended amounts of vitamin B12 do increase. So, you have a typical amount, but then we do have increasing amounts during pregnancy because of those important processes that she talked about, as well as vitamin B12 and folate are essential micronutrients that are required for synthesis of DNA, proteins, lipids. So it's there for an important purpose that it serves. General functioning in terms of the central nervous system. Again, remember we talked about that axon myelinization and the importance that that process is for conveying messages in the neuronal system in the central nervous system. So very important for us to have enough vitamin B12 for that production. Also, it's related to red blood cells. So we want to have healthy functioning for that for sure. Deficiency is associated with increased risk of neural tube defects and also intrauterine growth restrictions. So being smaller and also having those neural tube defects. Deficiency is associated with failure to thrive, as well as irritability, reduced cerebral growth. So you want, you want your brain to be developing at a healthy rate. So it's important that pregnant women have enough vitamin B12, as well as it has been related to serious delays in cognitive and language development in terms of outcomes.
And the other micronutrient we're going to talk about is iodine. And you might have heard about iodine because at the store you can purchase iodized salt or non-iodized salt. And my recommendation, always get iodized salt. Iodine is naturally occurring in foods like seaweed. And many vegetables have a certain amount of iodine themselves. However, from region to region and country to country, the amount of iodine in the soil differs. And there are some regions and countries that have very low iodine in their soil. So the produce that is produced in those soils are very low in iodine. So there's a very wide range of iodine content in vegetables, for instance, and fruits. But fish, dairy products are high in, have a good amount of iodine. However, I will say that it also depends on what the cows are eating and the environment where the cows are being raised, if there's iodine in that environment. So there could be variability in dairy products as well. And then breads that are enriched with a dough with iodate will also be good sources of iodine. I never thought there would come a day when women in the United States were not consuming enough iodine. And lo and behold, that day has come. So we do worry a lot about pregnant women being iodine insufficient in the United States. And we have actually seen that the amount of iodine that women are consuming has decreased over the decades. And one of the hypotheses is that there's a lot less consumption of milk. I don't know if you've noticed that. I've noticed it in my years in the United States. A lot of people do not drink milk anymore or consume dairy products. And there's a hypothesis that this is perhaps why the iodine intake in women in the United States has actually decreased. So, as you see here, there's a meta-analysis that showed that about 53% of pregnant women were iodine insufficient. And it was really much higher in those countries that I mentioned that have soil that is very low in iodine. So certainly a nutrient of concern.
And it is a concern for sure because what we know is there can be irreversible neurological damage that happens in the absence of having enough iodine in the diet. So iodine deficiency has been described as the leading cause of preventable impaired mental function worldwide. So some of the rates of countries like in Iran, 97% of pregnant women having insufficient iodine intake. In the Ukraine, 96%, Turkey, 90%. And like Aida said, even in the US, rates of 45 to 55% of women not having enough iodine in their diets. Severe iodine deficiency during pregnancy can relate to what we now call congenital hyperthyroidism in children. And that's a severe deficiency of thyroid hormone in newborns. It may occur because of the problem with the newborn's thyroid gland, or having a lack of iodine from the mother having a lack of iodine during pregnancy. And that, of course, is congenital hyperthyroidism is characterized by individuals having intellectual disability, their facial deformities associated with it, deafness, and severe growth stunting, which is what Aida spoke to us at the beginning of this lecture, is an important point related to getting enough, getting proper amounts of nutrition. So that does then relate to cognitive developmental scores, severe learning difficulties, lower IQ scores, even a meta-analysis that was done. So combining across different studies revealed a difference of 13.5 points in IQ when you compare iodine sufficient compared to iodine deficient individuals. So that's a tremendous, that's more than a standard deviation. So a tremendous amount of difference in IQ. And then iodine supplement programs during pregnancy have been supported by research findings. So showing improvements in IQ scores when iodine supplementation programs are utilized.
So winding down, we are going to end the presentation with a few things. One is, speaking of breastfeeding, we could not miss mentioning breastfeeding in this presentation, and then we'll end with some words about advocacy. Breastfeeding, as you probably have heard and know, it's the gold standard for feeding babies. It has all the components that the baby needs at a particular time, starting with colostrum. A newborn baby, it's not even breast milk yet. It's a substance that's very rich in immunoglobulins, low in calories, but high in sodium, potassium. It really meets what the baby needs at the time. And then breast milk composition will shift and will change as the baby ages to meet the needs of that baby at that age. So it's actually an incredible phenomenon. Breast milk has hormones, it has growth factors, it has digestive factors that help the baby absorb nutrients more easily. It promotes adequate growth, and also the immunoglobulins will help the babies not be as sick. So in essence, breastfeeding should be the gold standard for infant nutrition. Even in countries like the United States, we still do not have the numbers that we wish we had as far as breastfeeding. So in the United States, only about 83% of mothers report any amount of breastfeeding when the baby is born. So any amount of breastfeeding, and only 63% are exclusively breastfeeding. So the expert recommendations are 100% exclusive breastfeeding when the baby is born. So we have not achieved this. And then by 6 months, the recommendation is that women continue to breastfeed exclusively at least till 4 to 6 months. And exclusively means not adding any complementary foods. In the United States, only about 56% at 6 months report any amount of breastfeeding, and only 25% are exclusively breastfeeding. So we still have a ways to go with reaching our desired goals for breastfeeding in the United States. And I wanted to talk about advocacy and the programs that we can support and the programs that we can advocate so that our mothers, pregnant women, lactating women, and infants and children get adequate nutrition and the proper nutrition that they need. And for just about everything, except for probably food pantries or baby-friendly hospitals, the other programs are federally funded. And at some point or another, I have contacted my legislators to ask them to continue to fund or to increase the funding of these programs. So advocacy is critical for us to keep providing adequate nutrition to our population in the United States. The first program listed here is the Women, Infants, and Children program that provides supplemental food to pregnant women, postpartum women who are lactating, to infants and children up to the age of 5. And something that a lot of people don't realize is that the WIC food packages are specifically designed to supplement those nutrients that we have been talking about throughout this presentation that are critical for the child's development in utero. And also it provides infants and children those nutrients that are critical for their development in early childhood. So there's a lot of research supporting what goes into the WIC food package. So definitely whenever there's an opportunity, and we have had a very recent opportunity to contact our legislators and ask them to support and fund fully the WIC program, it does make a difference in the lives of these individuals. I'm going to skip over to the Child and Adult Care Food Program. So this program provides reimburses childcare centers and adult congregate meal centers and after-school programs, reimburses them for the snacks and the foods and the beverages that they are serving to those children. The CACFP program also abides by strict guidelines. So you cannot pick up your child in the after-school program and see that they're eating chips and a Coke or a soda, because that would not be reimbursable. So it's typically milk and something that is reimbursable within those guidelines. I don't know what it could be popcorn, for instance, or a piece of fruit. So again, advocating for continued funding for these programs, because that makes a difference in what a childcare provider will provide to children for all their meals while they're in childcare and what the children receive in school after school. The SNAP program, you probably have heard of SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It also provides funds for food and beverages. The one difference with SNAP is that it does not have very strict limits on what families can purchase with those funds. So there's great variability in what a family will purchase. SNAP does have a SNAP education component where individuals try very hard to educate communities, teach them cooking skills, etc., and really encourage them purchasing and utilizing more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, etc. But also a really important supplemental source of food funds for families. The Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program is not a food program. However, this one, I believe, started in 2010. And it sends individuals to go visit mothers or pregnant women or postnatally and with babies up to the age of 5. So people actually come to the home and support these families with whatever they need. It could be handling stress. It could be talking about child development. They screen women for depression. They notice how the babies and the children are developing. They make referrals. So it's very beneficial, especially in a country where a lot of people live very far away from family. This is a critical program that really helps during the first 1,000 days. Baby-friendly hospital initiative was started by WHO and UNICEF, and it's like a stamp of approval for hospitals that really promote breastfeeding. So there's 10 guidelines that hospitals have to meet in order to get that designation. And again, breastfeeding is our gold standard for feeding infants. And then I added food pantries because these are usually community supported. And many times when somebody goes to a food pantry, they do not find the healthiest foods. So my plug to you is whenever you have a food drive, you're collecting food for your food pantry, think about those foods that we talked about today. Think about those nutrients we talked about today. And can you make a donation of those foods that will really be nourishing to a pregnant lady, a pregnant individual, to a young child, to really give them the nutrition that they need for proper growth and development.
And Aida, I'm going to go back and add for another home visiting program just to toot our own horn with the UAB Early Head Start program. So Head Start and Early Head Start programs also focus a lot of efforts on good health, and nutrition is one of those components. So for us, making sure that of course, talking about breastfeeding with moms as they're pregnant, but working with pregnant women during their pregnancy, talking about early childhood education, what family supports that they may need, as well as good nutrition and making sure that that the family is getting that. And for the Office of Head Start has recently added, if you are a SNAP recipient, that automatically qualifies you for a Head Start or an early Head Start program. So also want to share that.
Absolutely, that's great.
So some conclusions we want you to take away from this is the importance of those 1,000 days between pregnancy and the child's second or even up to the third birthday, and how important and influential those are. That brain development is highly dependent on appropriate nutrient intake during pregnancy and appropriate intake of macronutrients. We chose to just concentrate on polyunsaturated fatty acids and proteins, but during pregnancy, how those do relate to higher cognitive development, memory, verbal abilities, IQ, and then of course the micronutrients that we mentioned as well. So iodine, B12, zinc, and iron. And then, of course, rounding that out with saying that breastfeeding is really best for developmental outcomes for children. We did a lot of research in order to come up with this presentation and wanting to provide some good, accurate data to you. So also included the references here. And then we just both want to thank you for your time and for wanting to join what we feel to be a really worthy and very important topic for discussions. So we will open it up if anyone has any questions in the few minutes time remaining that we have.
And feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally or put your question in the chat. I see one that's been added right now. I would definitely add advocacy for more FMLA time. You can have all the pumping rooms and wearable gear in the world, but it's still incredibly difficult to come back to work. Would love to see a study on the health of children in the first 1,000 days in countries that give people the time, security, and freedom to stay home with their babies for 6 months or longer. We in the US wonder why we're behind on breastfeeding with so many other aspects.
That's a great point. Definitely true to think about that in terms of maternity leave and paternity leave that's provided or an opportunity based on unfortunately the size of the organization that you work for, as well as something to be able to think about that, because if it's a smaller organization, they may not even be required to give as much FMLA time. So definitely important topic.
Thank you all for joining us. This was a great presentation, and we'll make sure and get those that seminar archive out to the registered participants just as soon as we can.